Well, welcome everyone. I am Bart Loeser. As many of you know, I am a corporate trainer by profession, corporate trainer and coach. I specialize in interpersonal skills. And one of the skills I was asked to talk about tonight or today is the issue of avoiding communication snafus. This is a problem we all face every day as we have to communicate in many, many different ways. I wish we could go back to the old-fashioned method of just communicating by cans because you had to stand pretty close to each other. You could actually probably see their face and such. But today, I have 5 different emails that people can contact me by. I have Facebook, Instagram. I have Instagram Messenger. I have Facebook Messenger. I have WhatsApp. I have several phone lines where people can contact me there. So when someone says, I sent the information to you, and who here can relate to this? They'll say, I sent the information, so I know you got it. And how many of you are wondering, I haven't seen it? Or like Amy asked me a question this morning, early this morning, sent me an email saying, hey, I want you to check this out on the website. Look at this on the website. I didn't know what she wanted me to look for, so I looked at the website and just had to communicate back what I thought she might mean. But I had no idea what she wanted me to look for or comment on. And yet, I'm sure to Amy, in her mind, she was perfectly clear. She knew what she was going for when she asked me to do something. Who was it not clear to? The receiver of the communication. Now, I want to ask you all, who is ultimately the one most responsible for making sure the receiver of the communication got it in the way that you intended? David Scott, what do you think? Who is ultimately almost 100% responsible to make sure you are successful in your communication to others?
The sender.
It is always the sender. And yet, how often do we blame someone else because they have a different style than ours and they won't work with our style? Or they interpreted words in a way we did not intend for them to interpret, and you're thinking, how could you possibly have thought that? And yet, that's the problem with communication. I have these discussions constantly with people about communication should not be that hard. As a matter of fact, one of our division directors once exclaimed that to me out of a little bit of frustration, and I understand their frustration. Why should communication be this hard? We are Toastmasters, for God's sake. Well, actually, all communication is difficult. I don't care how good you are. Although, as Toastmasters, we should be sharper in our communication. We have a higher level of accountability. Just as some of you who may be the firstborn in your family, how many of you would expect the firstborn to be the most responsible, the most patient, the smartest, the most sharp, always the one willing to take responsibility? Why is that fair that they should have to do that? Well, because they should know better. How many of us as Toastmasters should know better not to have these communication snafus, and yet we have these happen all the time? So let's look at the 10 most typical communication snafus and what you can do to improve in dealing with it. First of all, does everyone know what snafu is? We're making an assumption that everyone knows, well, I know it sounds like it's not a good thing. You should avoid this. But what is a snafu? Snafu is actually a term that was popularized in World War II. And it was popularized because of how much trouble, how many dangers, how much complications were created based on communication mess ups, assumptions that were made, all sorts of problems. And so they came up with this term, situation normal, all screwed up. They didn't quite use fouled up, but that you kind of get what I'm going for. Situation normal, all fouled up. It is normal for human beings to miscommunicate. We all interpret even the same words sometimes in different ways. Sometimes we have positive words, like in Toastmasters, one of the most important things we do is we learn from feedback. Or should we learn from criticism? Which is better? Is criticism better or feedback better? What do you think, Amy Espinoza?
Feedback.
Feedback. Now, did you realize that the word feedback and the word criticize is the same thing?
It's just nicer.
Well, one has developed a connotation, an emotional impact that obviously criticism isn't going to be positive. Well, how many of you would agree constructive criticism, which you shouldn't have to use the word constructive in front of it, all criticism should be constructive, help you to build. But how many of us don't hear that as something we want to listen to? So the word feedback connotates something perhaps more, at least not as judgmental in a negative way. But feedback is just presenting our critical opinion of what we're noticing to you in a way where we want you to learn or help you to improve. But people don't like hearing the word criticism or criticize. One of my favorite quotes comes from the famous artist George Bernard Shaw, famous playwright who once said, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." It all comes back to listening and our desire to understand. We have to get better at learning how to understand each other. So we're going to go through, and I'm going to talk about what I think is the number one biggest mistake all human beings make. We all do this. We assume that our messages have been understood. The listener assumes that they understood you, and the communicator, the sender of the information, thinks that as long as you say you understood, that you did. But how many of us have ever found that what you thought you said to somebody was not what they heard? Have you ever had an argument with someone back and forth? That's not what I said. Well, that's what I heard. Well, that's not what I said. Could both be true. And the only way to fix this is you have to get into a habit of always, and we don't do anything always, but I want you to get in a habit of more than most times, take time to check that people have understood your message. And Wendy Lord, I want to ask you, there is only one way you know that people understood or how they understood your message. What is the only way you know they did that does not leave it up to an assumption?
When they do exactly what I told them.
Ah, I love that. That's the mark of a manager. I was about to say the mark of a great manager, but I might suggest, as a manager, do you want to wait until they have failed before you realize that you have failed to communicate?
No, perhaps I want them to tell me exactly what they're going to do or exactly what they think they're going to do before
Yes.
they do it and screw it up.
Like, tell me what your plan is. Help
Mhm.
me understand your understanding of what you're going for. If you're going to give me results, I need to know that you have a plan, but more importantly, I need to see how your plan is going to get those results. Because have you ever had someone who had a plan for how they thought they were going to get your results, but their plan clearly was not the results or wasn't going to lead to the results you wanted them to get? And can you trust someone, David Scott, if they have a plan that you don't think is going to work? Can you trust someone if you don't think their plan is going to work?
It may work, but if I don't trust them, I don't think it's going to work.
And how easy is it to delegate if you don't trust them?
It's not easy.
You almost cannot do so.
Right.
So if you want to, as a leader, get better at being able to trust that they should come up with a plan, but if they come up with the plan, their plan has to also work for you. So you should always find out what their plan is for how they're going to get this done. That's why we district directors want to know, how do our clubs plan to become a distinguished club? We want to know what their plan is, but we want them to come up with the plan because it should be their plan. But if they say, oh, I'll figure it out somehow, how many of you know that's not a good plan? So we want to have a plan that's written down, that's clear, and that's actually, and how does David Scott know that it was clear? They have to explain the plan in such a way where he clearly understands how it's going to work, because that's the only way he can support the plan. Right, David? Otherwise,
Right.
it's uncomfortable. So we have to communicate our understanding back to somebody. But I want to ask Brendan Grace, if you'll unmute yourself for a second. If I ask you, Brendan, to repeat back your understanding of what you and I just discussed, what might you be thinking at that moment? And keep it clean.
What does the person want me to tell them versus what I actually heard?
Yeah, how many people get a little bit concerned that if I ask you to repeat back what I just told you, I'm accusing you of not listening, of not paying attention, of not being smart? Is that my intent?
Only that person knows that answer.
Exactly. And but is it possible that other people, if I ask you to do the only thing I would have to do to know that you understood me clearly is ask you to repeat it back. And yet, if I ask you to do so, most people get defensive and don't want to do that. So, what would keep Brendan from getting defensive? What if I make my intent clear and make sure it's positive at the beginning? Brendan, I would like to know your understanding of what we're going to go over or what I'm asking for. And so here's what I'm going to want from you. Would you mind repeating it back at the end in your own way so that I can know I was clear?
Absolutely.
If I do that at the beginning, he has no problem with it. Now, will Brendan be listening more carefully?
Absolutely.
Probably so. And would he have a problem if I ask him to repeat it back at the end?
No.
Nope.
So
All right.
always make your present, because we assume that because our intent is positive, they will understand our intent. How many people don't understand our intent of why we're asking what we're asking for? Like when I've said at the beginning, I didn't understand Amy's intent of why she's asking me this in this email. I don't know what she's asking me for. Clearly something's wrong that I didn't notice, but after looking at it, I still didn't see what was wrong. So I had to just say, here's what I think you want me to find, but I don't really know. So make your intent clear at the beginning. And the only way you know you were clear is they would have to repeat it back. Can that be done well in an email? Y'all can just shake your heads to the left and the right, because the answer is always no. It cannot be done well in an email, but I'll get to that mistake later. So use open questions that start with the who, what, when, where, why, or how. Although I might say avoid why, because whenever you ask why, people begin to think you're being accusatory. So change that. Instead of saying why, say what or how instead of why to get that answer. And how is almost always the most important thing you want to listen for, is how they plan to get it done. The only way you know they have a good plan is they're going to have to explain that to you in a way you can support it. Right, David?
Right.
And if you let them know up front why you want that, and you make sure that it sounds very positive to them, they're willing to do that. So that's the first thing. Always repeat back your communication. Confirm and reiterate back your understanding. You should do it. Reiterate back your understanding when someone else speaks to you, and you should ask them to do it, but let them know up front you're going to ask them to do that. Secondly, delivering bad news by email. How many of us don't want to give people bad news? So we try to soften it by putting it in text-only communication. It is the worst way to communicate bad news, because you don't know how they're going to take it, but you also can't convey your intent either. So doing it by instant message and email is a terrible way to communicate. You must offer those nonverbal cues like the body language. That's why doing it in a Zoom meeting is helpful, because at least we can see each other. And if you at least hear the voice, like on the phone, you give a chance for the verbal. People have to hear your tone, and you have to hear how they're receiving your message. I always like to ask people, how do you know you've miscommunicated to someone? By their reaction. When people react in a way that you did not expect, you now know they did not take it the way you probably meant. But if you can't see them or hear their reaction, you don't know you've miscommunicated. That's why at the beginning, as I mentioned and David so aptly answered, I'm 100% responsible to make sure that I'm sensitive in how I send my communication, to make sure that they hear it in the best way possible. That's why bad news should always be delivered in person in the best way you can, and in a way that's sensitive to how they might take it. When delivering sensitive information that might trigger a negative reception, always deliver it in person, whether it's where it's easier to pick up on misunderstandings. And if you've misunderstood, fix it immediately. Go back and make your intent clear, because obviously they didn't take it the way you meant. How many of you can relate to that situation? Thirdly, avoid difficult conversations. At some point, you're going to need to give negative feedback, and it's tempting to try to avoid those conversations. Remember the elephant in the room. If you can look around in your office and think, if you had an elephant in that room, would it be easy to get it out of there, David Scott? Look around your room. Could you get that elephant out of there, a full-grown elephant?
Be impossible.
It'd be impossible. Well, there is one way you could, and you're not going to like it. You're going to have to shoot it and cut it up into smaller pieces. Thank goodness we're in Texas. You probably have a gun, but you probably don't have a machete. So it's messy. The elephant's not going to like it. It's not going to be fun. But how did the elephant get in there in the first place, David, if you had a full-grown elephant in your office, if it couldn't get out of there?
It came in as a baby and I never did anything with it. I ignored it.
Exactly. It's the only way it could have gotten in there. So why didn't you say something about it early when you knew it was going to eventually become a problem? But we don't do that. Take care of these troubles early. Preparation is the key to handling any difficult situation, but especially difficult conversations. Learn to give clear, actionable feedback if you're going to encourage people to fix something or change something, because they need to notice it. They need to own the fact that they're the ones making the choices here, and they're the only ones who can make different choices that will fix it. But without having that conversation, you can't get anyone to improve or fix a situation. That's why we give feedback in Toastmasters, because we want all people to improve, but those are difficult conversations to have. At least in Toastmasters, we learn how to have those difficult conversations, but also learn how to word it in a way where it softens that feedback and builds them up instead. You may want to role play these conversations. That's why we practice this in Toastmasters, how to give feedback that's always sounds positive and motivating and constructive. I'm sure all of you as Toastmasters know you have to practice that. We don't give people chances much in the outside world to do that. That's why I encourage Toastmasters to everyone, especially managers whose primary job is to constantly give feedback that's meant to be constructive. Mistake number 4, not being assertive, which you can imagine there are some people when I say, just have those difficult conversations. Are there some people who don't feel comfortable being assertive and asserting how they see it? Assertiveness is about stating what you need while considering the wants and needs of others. That's the difference between crossing the line and being aggressive. Aggressive is saying what you mean, but not caring how they take it.
I just wanted to add something to what you said. In my opinion, problems with resolving differences in communication are due to a lack of intellect. And it's always incumbent upon ourselves to get smarter in every aspect of our lives. And believability is always important in communication. If you don't believe me about something, how can we be on the same sheet of music, so to speak? If I took a lie detector test about anything, and
one challenge is choosing those words, because when you say it's a matter of intellect, oh, are you saying I don't have intellect? Are you saying I'm not smart? And then all of a sudden people become defensive, and then they don't listen to a word you're trying to say. So we have to be careful how we choose those words. And
it's
keep
like
going.
over there.
I'm interrupting you.
That's okay. Like all the war that we're having, like over there in the Middle East, in Ukraine, people can't resolve their differences because they have a lack of intellect. They're just not smart enough to know that we shouldn't be killing each other, and children and women.
I might choose a word that's different than lack of intellect. It's a lack of awareness, perhaps, a lack of some knowledge and a lack of awareness. Even this seminar addresses almost every single issue that probably plays into those complications. And unfortunately, we don't have time to get into those types of issues. So I'd like to save that for another time, but let's go ahead and move forward so we can get through these. But thank you for that point.
You're welcome.
So the benefit of being assertive is that you stand a better chance of getting what you want or of reaching a compromise when you speak your truth, when you speak how you see it, as long as we've learned to listen to each other. And that's the other key. But you have to be clear about what your needs are. So assertiveness also means saying no when you need to. It is best received when you demonstrate respect for their request. So one thing I'll encourage you to do is always be willing to listen to how they see it first before you share how you see it. So always be willing to listen to how they see it first before you share how you see it. And if you can demonstrate that you listen to them fully, and remember, they get to decide whether you're listening to them. So are you listening to them? Demonstrate you are. Demonstrate that you understand by repeating back your understanding. Acknowledge your understanding. And the third thing, Find a way to validate how they see it, because they always think the way they see it is right. And what do people want you to do if they think the way they say it is right, David Scott?
Agree with them.
Agree with them. So always listen to them, acknowledge what they said, and find a way to agree with them before you ever share how you see it. Then they're more open to listening to how you see it. Assertiveness also means saying no when you need to. I'm going to teach you a simple method on how to say no and yet still do it without burning bridges. And lastly, assertiveness is not the same as aggression. Aggression is when you don't care how they take it. Assertiveness is definitely caring how they take it, or showing you care how they take it, but demonstrate that first before you share how you see it. So you go for a win-win outcome. One way to do this, and we won't have time to practice this, but you have this in this recording, is you follow a 3-step method, and you can't skip one of these steps. When you're going to say no or set boundaries with people and let them know they can't cross the boundary, you always say something that first demonstrates you care how they see it. So you say an understanding statement that demonstrates I understand and can validate how you see it. The one thing you don't want to do, which we always do if we're going to tell someone no, is we then say but or however. So just like saying ums or ahs in Toastmasters, say nothing, just pause. And then move on to what's your situation, because you're going to tell them no, or at least no, I can't do this right now. So tell them what your situation is. Here's my situation might be a great way to start that. And thirdly, so that's why my answer is a no, or so I can't do it right now, but here's what I could do. Or let's work out a win-win solution. That way you set boundaries, you say no to people, but in a way that they're willing to hear it and still feel respected. The 5th mistake, reacting versus responding. We are emotional beings. And have you ever displayed annoyance or anger at a colleague, or frustration, or sent a terse reply in an email when you've been triggered emotionally? We all do that. The costs are that we have an emotional reaction that can damage the reputation, our reputation, and of course our relationship with them. You may upset people, and of course, when you burn bridges with people, are they more open or less open to hearing what you have to say and working with you?
Less.
If you want people to be open, you must learn to manage your emotions, and that's a whole class on emotional intelligence, but learn how to respond in a way that's constructive, not destructive, that burns bridges. One way you can do that, I call it the stop, drop, and roll method, because you all learned that in school. If you find yourself on fire, never run, always stop, drop, and roll. If you find yourself emotionally on fire, stop and get out of the situation. But you have to notice you've been triggered. Do not take action just yet. Then do something that will drop your emotions down so that you can calm your mind, and only then decide how you're going to roll. Do not move forward with an action when your emotions are high. If you've been emotionally triggered, you are emotionally on fire, this will not go well. Number 6, not preparing well. We all know about the importance of preparation, and that poorly prepared presentations, reports, or emails frustrate your audience and can create damage to your reputation. So it's essential to prepare, but be careful. Don't over-prepare. You don't want to be over-prepared, because you can't be prepared for every possible detail. Things never go as planned. You just have to prepare the best you can and then make it happen. But you should set aside time to plan your communication thoroughly. So discover methods and tools that you can use to create intelligent and compelling messages that will appeal to your audience. Mistake number 7. Using a one-size-fits-all approach. We are all different. Everyone, even if you had an identical twin, they are not going to be like you. So this one-size-fits-all approach is not only not respectful, but it also means you can't truly know what it's like to walk in their shoes. The only thing you can do is ask lots of open-ended questions and learn about different cultures, different perspectives, whether someone's older or younger, of a different culture, of a different race, of a different age group, of a different gender. They're not going to see things our way. So always try to see it their way first, so you can prepare how to best approach in a way that does not disrespect how they see it. Be sensitive to the fact that no one sees things the way you see it. Find out how they see it first before you plan how you're going to communicate. Number 8, not keeping an open mind. It relates just to the same thing. It's tempting to want to stereotype or make assumptions. We do that all the time. Failure to consider the other person's own unique background, their personality, their experience can easily cause misinterpretations or cause them to feel disrespected or that you're uncaring. How many times have our communications ever backfired on us because we didn't realize they don't see it the way we see it? And no one does. So always be aware of your communication and how it falls on your audience. Like, I can't even see all my audience, so I don't even know how this communication is falling on you. But we only have 30 minutes so to teach an awful lot. But one thing Stephen Covey always said in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is seek first to understand them, then find a way you can be understood. You're responsible for your communication, so if you communicate in a way that disrespects them, that's on you. And we all learn from our mistakes. I'm always willing to ask for forgiveness for having been ignorant, because I was ignorant about how my communication was coming across to you. And now that I realize you find that offensive, I don't want to say it that way to you. I want to change how I'm doing it. Learn to manage cultural differences so that you can take advantage of what their needs are and their expectations and put that into consideration. It demonstrates respect, which is what we're all about as Toastmasters. One way you think about it is people have their different beliefs, perceptions, and experiences. Find out what those are and how that might influence your communication. Number 9, this is a simple one, not editing your work. How many of you have ever sent out a text or an email and after you sent it, you realized you didn't send that attachment, or it wasn't as clear as you thought it was when they're asking you questions? We all do that, Brendan. It's something we all do. And you can use things like Grammarly, which is a free plugin that looks for possible misspellings. It's not perfect, but you can have ways to get these things done. You can use dictionaries. You can have someone else read it for you. That's my favorite. Read this for me and see if this is as clear as I think it is. And whenever someone sends you an email asking for clarity, always accept the fact that you may not have been as clear as you thought you were. And it's best to pick up the phone, because the only way you can truly clarify is in a two-way conversation. So, but you know things such as writing down the word your versus you are, your, its, affect, affect. These are very different words, and they can change if you don't know the difference between them. But ask colleagues to look over these documents so you can be more assured and making sure at least that you used proper grammar and proper spelling. Because even though I'll see something that's misspelled or improper grammar, I sometimes have to remind myself they don't have the same quirks I do. I'm not going to think less of you, but that's my first temptation is, don't you know how to spell? Don't you know American grammar, Wendy Lord? It's like Wendy's from a different culture. She may not use our grammar. That doesn't mean she's wrong. That means we're the ones who may be wrong in her eyes. And she will certainly be happy to admit that. So, and lastly, accidentally violating others' privacy. When you send out an email, you should think very clearly who should go into the CC, who should go into the blind copy, but you definitely don't want to be sending all these email addresses to people who should not be having other people's email addresses. That's an important consideration and sensitivity we should think about in Facebook, here in Toastmasters. Writing sensitive messages before you select a recipient is a helpful thing. So that's why you might even write it in someplace outside of an email, but never put the addresses that you're going to be sending them to until you're finally ready to send. And even then, I usually make mistakes once I think I'm finally ready. Double check, triple check sometimes. It is not easy, but you can draft these emails in a word processing document or a blank email if you need to before you put them in the real email. These are the biggest mistakes people have when communicating. And if you can avoid these snafus, don't make assumptions, always ask, deliver bad news in person, have difficult conversations, which means you need to plan a time to do it. That's why I put it on my calendar. Call this person at this time and have that difficult conversation I don't want to have. Be assertive in that conversation. Use your emotional intelligence. Respond. Don't react. Always prepare. Be flexible. Keep an open mind. Always edit your work and don't violate privacy or privacy. Don't violate privacy or confidentiality. No one's perfect. So that's my presentation. I hope you guys have found some great tips. You can always watch back over this, write down the ones that really get in your way, and find ways and techniques that can help you be a better communicator. Thank you very much.